Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Protect Your Farm Business, where we talk about agribusiness-related topics. And this week, as you can see from my PowerPoint and also the title of this video, we'll be discussing cover crops. And so I'm not sure about you, but cover crops seems to be a very big topic for discussion. We're really diving into soil health practices that can help your soil over the long term. And so I just wanted to dive in and discuss with you guys today some economics of cover crops. And in the description box, you will actually see some supporting materials, and there's a lot of good information. So there is some SARE readings that are under that, and NRCS actually has a couple of decision aids that are also available for you online. And so if you're interested in that, please look in the description box. So today, again, I want to talk about the economics of cover crops. And so, okay, perfect. And so I really wanted to talk about the cover crop considerations. We'll briefly go over literature on economics of cover crops, and again, a lot of that is in the description box where I think there's a lot of good readings. I wanted to show an example for an Idaho based on literature finding. So kind of an example of Idaho based on our enterprise crop budgets and then implementing some cover crop costs and benefits that are associated, and we'll get into that. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about future research. So, like I said, cover crops are a huge topic for discussion, and there are large grants that actually the University of Idaho and a lot of other universities are participating in to really understand the economics of cover crops for different cropping systems. So I know I am on a soil health grant that is involved with potatoes. And so what are the soil health properties with potatoes? How do cover crops help or hurt them? And then what are the costs associated with that? So there are a lot of work, there's a lot of work happening down the pipeline that you'll see a lot of research about coming soon. And so let's just follow into this PowerPoint. And again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out in the chat box. There's a little bit of a lag on my end, so I won't be as quick to respond, but please leave some comments if you're watching this past the live version. I would love to hear from you. So, what is your why? This is one of the biggest questions that we have to ask people when they're thinking about getting into cover crops. And if you don't understand your why, then why are you getting into cover crops? So I think, are you potentially going to plant cover crops to maybe ensure longevity of the farm? So you're saying, I want to build my soil health, and so I've read that cover crops can help with this, therefore I want this farm to live on longer than I do. And that could be one of your reasons why you want to implement or incorporate cover crops. Do you want to be more resilient? So maybe you think that with climate change, we will be seeing more droughts, or we will be maybe seeing more rain, but would you like those crops to be more resilient and therefore need to build up your soil health by incorporating some cover crops? Do you want to be environmentally sustainable? Maybe you want to have less runoff or less leaching from your farm into water systems. Do you want to increase your organic matter and fertility? Do you want to control soil erosion? Do you want to attract pollinators? Do you want to cut costs? So, this is kind of what I'll dive into today, is this idea of, will incorporating cover crops help me cut costs? And I think that is one of the main motivations for a lot of people that are incorporating cover crops. And I just want to figure out if that's your motivation or why you think you should incorporate cover crops or not incorporate cover crops, and what have you heard. So if you are following me live or watching this later, I would love to hear your experience in the comments, because I think it's very interesting. So again, understanding that why. So this is actually a picture from SARE, and discussing how really these soil health management practices are really helping you transition that land to be as productive as you found it, or currently have it, for that next generation. And of course, you guys know, if you follow the channel, I love talking about succession planning, and I always think it is about passing on that farm. But you want to pass on a farm that is productive, that is fertile, so that they're able to plant crops and actually grow them. So if that is your why, that is great. And I just wanted to emphasize that. So when we think about cover crops, there are a couple of considerations. So there's direct benefits, which might say you'll have an increase in yield, or which could in turn increase your crop revenue if you've had an increase in yield. Well, there's also direct cost. Well, if you are planting, then you'll have maybe an increase in seed cost. And so the increased cost from implementation. There's indirect benefits, where there's possible cost savings for cash crops. So say you will use less water over the years, and that can be a possible saving. And there's also indirect cost, where if you planted a cover crop and there became a disease from that cover crop into your cash crop, then that can be an indirect cost of cover crops. So there's a lot of risk in ag policy that are also associated with cover crop considerations. So if you are able to get a grant to incorporate cover crops, then you'll have a different view of this versus someone who might not have that ag policy or subsidy associated with cover crop planting. So the belief versus reality. So the belief is that most people plant cover crops for farm survivability, environmental stewardship, and social welfare. So you're doing this out of the goodness of Mother Nature, but in reality, most people plant cover crops to increase profit, decrease yield variability. And so those are the strongest incentives to adopt cover crops. So even though the belief is we're doing this to help nature and maybe the longevity of the farm, reality shows that most people get into this because they think they can reduce those input costs, or maybe make sure that yield variability is to a minimum. So factors that affect your profitability, just to recap, well, your profit is your total revenue minus your total cost. So your total revenue is yield times price, and so again, factors of cover crops affecting those yields could affect your total revenue. And then you have your cost, which if you think of costs associated with operating, you have fertilizers, herbicides, water. Water is a huge one here in the Magic Valley and in Idaho. So cover crops to soil health. Well, there's issues when we talk about the economics of it. Because how do we value soil health? It's very difficult to say that because you've implemented this, your land is worth more than a neighbor's land. And would someone pay a premium on that land knowing that your organic matter might be bigger or better than the neighboring producer? How should we value being able to use the land in the future? So how should I value that land today, knowing that it might be in production in 50 years versus a neighbor's area? And then the value of the soil is difficult to measure. we haven't really put a price on that soil. We haven't put a price on that organic matter. So it's very hard to come up with numbers that actually give that a value. So I bet you've seen this, but SARE put out the many benefits of cover crops. And so these are what falls under the direct benefits. And so you can see here there's a lot of direct benefits that are claimed by SARE for cover crop use. So some of them: yield benefits, soil protection, nutrient cycling, fertilizer cost savings, weed control, herbicide savings, reduced tillage, biofuel, feedstock potential, livestock feed costs, grazing costs. Okay, so those are direct benefits. Well, if you think of some of those, why would we want to save on fertilizer costs? And so throughout the literature, we've heard that you could save on fertilizer costs by incorporating cover crops. Well, it's saying that you could save maybe 40 to 200 pounds an acre of nitrogen by using cover crops. Well, how much money would that actually be saving you? And as you can see, dry nitrogen in Idaho has actually been going down, the price of dry nitrogen. And so it would be hard to say that incorporating cover crops would save you a lot of money, but it would be interesting, and we'll get into the example of how this actually would show up on an enterprise budget. Same with herbicides. So literature suggests reduced weed density of 9 to 27%. So herbicide prices over time in the Magic Valley, as you can see, they've also been going down. So making herbicide cheaper. And so then there's also this feeding and grazing benefits, which I think have the most potential in the Magic Valley for the use of our cover crops here. Grazing those cover crops actually do give you a benefit. And that's shown in this first bullet where it says UI grazing cover crops and the estimated grazing efficiency of a crop ground at about 35%, making 2 AUMs available per acre of cover crop. And so that is that added direct benefit of $70 per acre. And additionally, grazing crops would be an alternative to feed or hay, which would save about $150 per ton. And especially in years where there's not a lot of hay, if you had cover crops to graze, you might be seeing a large direct benefit for that. So again, those direct costs. So we can talk about the benefits, but there's really a lot of costs that can be associated with the cover crops. And that's really falling into the planting and managing those cover crops. And so if you think of planting, it requires equipment. So there might be no-till drills, extra down pressure springs, a disc opener, aerial applications. Then there's those seed costs that I'm talking about. And I don't know about you across the state or across the country, but those seed costs come into play when we're talking about the bottom line. And so seed costs can be highly variable depending on variety, seeding rate, and uncontrollable factors such as availability. And then there's also labor, time, and opportunity costs. And so what could you have been doing instead of planting those cover crops? So those seed costs, again, the willingness to pay for seed stated in literature, there's realistic cost of seed, and then there's seed cost in Idaho. And so what we haven't really dug into all of the different seed costs in Idaho, but it's very interesting. And so I wanted to show an example of a budget example that SARE provides. Well, in years of cover cropping, as you can see, they go from 1 year, 3 years, and then 5 years. And so input cost savings when using cover crops. You can see in year 1, you don't save any money because you just planted the cover crop. So you're not necessarily seeing those soil benefits. But then in year 3, you're seeing some of it. And then year 5, you are seeing a lot of benefits in the budget in this budget example. And so the savings on inputs, and then they're saying you would get extra yield, in a normal weather year. And so, as you can see here, in the first year, they actually saw that the yield increased, and it just keeps going up each year. And then there's that cost of seed and seeding, so you have to take that into account. And as you can see, that seed cost really puts you out in that first year. You recover it barely in year 3, and then year 5, you're actually seeing that to be positive, just because your saving on inputs is so much greater than that seed cost. So it's really showing you that in the first couple of years, you have to be able to take a hit and really be okay with your bottom line being maybe in the red, which might not be easy for producers, especially in the market situation we're currently in. So indirect benefits, again, you might increase soil organic matter, you might reduce erosion, you might reduce carbon sequestration, you might decrease siltation of reservoir, you might decrease flooding risk, you might increase wildlife habitat, or increase beneficial insects. But then you might have indirect costs, so leaching of chemicals and nutrients beyond the root, residue-covered soils may be slow to warm and delay emergence, decrease soil water for the cash crop, and host disease or pests, which I think are a really big concern, especially when we're talking about potatoes. So again, those opportunity costs, there's the time and the money associated with cover crops. So before we end today, I wanted to show you the example. And so when we're thinking of an agribusiness example, we're showing 2019 spring barley, which is here in the Madrid Valley. So as you can see, we have our seed, our fertilizer, and our pesticides. And so we're seeing that net returns above operating costs in 19 are $282.38 per acre. So let's say we add cover crops into the mix. Well, now, not only are we buying barley seed, but we're buying cover crop seed. And so we're saying that you need about 13 pounds per acre, and it's about $1.10 per pound. And so you're seeing that the cost per acre is about $14.30. And so as you can see, the net returns above operating costs, you are down what you could have been by $28.34, which is very close to that SARE example that I showed. Well, let's think of year 2. So year 2, we incorporate that cover crop seed, but then we also have a reduction in nitrogen use. And so our net loss is actually only $8.84 of where it could have been without cover crops. And so we're still in that red of losing money on cover crops. Well, let's look at year 3. Well, so we actually decreased our nitrogen, and then again we have the cover crop seed. And so we do have a net gain finally of $9.88. And so it took 3 years to then make up for the money that you're putting into cover crops by the reduction of input costs. And so I just wanted to show you guys this example. Grazing is not incorporated in this, which could be a great source of income for cover crops, and might be a really good reason to incorporate it into your farm plan. And so with that, I've given you a lot of food for thought, and I'd love to hear your comments. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me. Also, do not be afraid to leave comments. I will get back to you if I see any comments, and I hope you come back next week. I think we're going to discuss hemp, because that is a really big buzzword. So with that, thank you, and have a great rest of your day.